Have you ever heard a woman crying in the middle of the night near a river, canal, or lake? Not laughing, not talking, crying. The kind of sorrow that makes your heart ache and makes you want to help. In Mexico, people say that if you hear those cries after dark, you should run the other way, because the voice belongs to La Llorona, and if she is calling, someone may never come home. I grew up in California's Central Valley in a small farming community where Mexican traditions were a part of everyday life. Family gatherings were never complete without stories passed down from older generations. My grandmother was the storyteller everyone respected. Whenever she spoke, people listened. Most of her stories were funny or inspiring, but there was one legend that always changed the mood in the room. It was the story of La Llorona, the weeping woman. Even the adults became quiet when her name was mentioned. As a child, I loved scary stories and constantly asked questions about ghosts and monsters. One evening I asked my grandmother if La Llorona was real. Instead of laughing, she looked directly at me and said that some stories are meant to entertain, while others exist as warnings. Then she told me never to follow the sound of a crying woman near water after dark. Her serious tone stayed with me long after the conversation ended. My grandmother explained that long ago there was a beautiful woman who fell deeply in love and built a family with the man she believed she would spend her life with. Together, they had children and seemed happy. But eventually her husband abandoned her for another woman. The betrayal shattered her heart and filled her with anger. Consumed by grief and rage, she committed an unforgivable act. She drowned her own children in a river. The moment she realized what she had done, regret overwhelmed her. Unable to live with the pain, she threw herself into the same water and died. According to the legend, her spirit was denied peace. Now she wanders rivers, lakes, and canals, searching endlessly for the children she lost. Her cries echo through the night as she calls for them. Some believe she mistakes living children for her own and takes them away. When my grandmother finished the story, the room felt colder than before. When I turned 17, ghost stories were the last thing on my mind. My best friend Diego had recently gotten his driver's license, and we spent most weekends driving around town looking for places to hang out. One warm summer evening, Diego, his cousin Marco, our friend Elena, and I decided to visit an old canal bridge outside town. The bridge sat far from houses and city lights, surrounded by endless fields. It was the perfect place to relax and talk. We parked near the canal and spent hours joking about school, relationships, and future plans. Eventually, the conversation shifted toward local legends. Someone mentioned Bigfoot. Someone else mentioned UFOs. Then Elena brought up La Llorona. Everyone had heard stories from grandparents or relatives claiming they had encountered her. I laughed and said those stories were probably invented to keep children away from dangerous waterways. Nobody argued. Yet deep down, each of us seemed slightly uncomfortable discussing the legend in that isolated darkness. Just after midnight, everything changed. We were in the middle of a conversation when a distant sound drifted across the fields. It was the unmistakable sound of a woman crying. The sound was soft at first, but carried clearly through the night air. Every one of us stopped talking immediately. The crying lasted only a few seconds before disappearing into silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Marco finally suggested it was probably a coyote, but his voice lacked confidence. We all knew what we had heard. The sound carried an emotion that felt undeniably human. It wasn't just crying. It was heartbreak, the kind of grief that felt unbearable. After a few minutes, we decided to leave. During the drive home, the atmosphere inside the car was completely different. The jokes stopped. The laughter vanished. Nobody wanted to mention the crying or the legend we had been discussing moments earlier. Yet all of us were thinking about the same thing. The next evening, I casually mentioned the strange crying sound to my grandmother. I expected her to laugh it off or explain it away. Instead, the color immediately drained from her face. Without saying a word, She stood up and walked to her bedroom. A few minutes later, she returned carrying a silver crucifix. She placed it in my hand and told me to keep it with me at all times. I tried joking about it, but she remained serious. Then she repeated the same warning she had given me years earlier. If I ever heard crying near water again, I was not to investigate. I was not to answer. I was not to follow it. Something in her eyes unsettled me, more than the story itself. For the first time, I wondered whether she truly believed the legend. I promised I would listen. At the time, I fully intended to keep that promise. Unfortunately, curiosity proved stronger than common sense. 3 nights later, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard the sound again. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the crying returned. This time it sounded closer, much closer. The rest of the house was completely silent. Outside my window, the night seemed unusually still. No insects, no wind, only the distant sobbing of a woman. My grandmother's warning immediately echoed in my mind, but instead of staying inside, I grabbed a flashlight and quietly left the house. As I walked toward the canal road, the crying became clearer. Each step brought me closer to the source. The sound felt strange because it seemed to pull me forward. It created an overwhelming urge to keep moving. By the time I reached the canal, my heart was racing. Then I saw a figure standing beside the water, a woman dressed entirely in white. Her head was lowered as she cried softly beside the canal. At first, the woman appeared completely normal. Her long dark hair covered most of her face, and her white dress moved gently, despite the absence of wind. For several seconds, I simply watched her from a distance. Part of me wondered if she needed help. Another part told me to leave immediately. Then the crying stopped. Slowly, she turned toward me. The moment she moved, every instinct inside me screamed that something was wrong. A wave of terror hit me so suddenly that I could barely breathe. The woman began approaching. She moved silently across the ground. As she came closer, I noticed something impossible. Her feet never touched the dirt. She wasn't walking. She was floating. The realization shattered every rational explanation I had been trying to create. The distance between us closed far too quickly. The closer she came, the stronger the feeling of dread became. Finally, survival instinct took over. I turned around and ran. The instant I started running, the sound behind me changed. The heartbreaking sobbing transformed into furious screaming. The noise echoed across the fields like something wounded and enraged. I sprinted down the dirt road as fast as I could. My flashlight bounced wildly in my hand. Every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder. Each time, she seemed much closer than she should have been. It felt as though distance meant nothing to her. The screams grew louder. Mixed within them were sounds of rushing water and wet footsteps splashing across invisible puddles. Panic consumed me. I focused only on reaching town. Ahead, the distant glow of streetlights finally appeared. I pushed myself harder than ever before. The moment I crossed into the first residential street, everything stopped. The screams vanished. The footsteps vanished. The presence vanished. I looked behind me and saw only an empty road stretching back toward the canal. But I knew I hadn't imagined what happened. In the weeks that followed, I kept the experience to myself. I convinced myself that fear and darkness had distorted my perception. Then, children began disappearing. The first case involved a young boy who vanished without a trace. Search teams spent days looking for him. Nothing was found. Soon, another child disappeared. Then another. Fear spread rapidly through the community. Parents refused to let children play outside alone. Rumors flooded the town. Some people blamed kidnappers. Others suspected human traffickers. Everyone had a theory. During a community meeting, an elderly woman stood up and claimed she had heard a woman crying near the canal before each disappearance. Most people dismissed her statement as superstition. I couldn't dismiss it. Every word sent a chill through me because I remembered what I had seen beside the water. For the first time, I started wondering if the old legend was more than folklore. Maybe something truly dangerous was out there after all. One evening, my grandmother called me into her room. Before I could say anything, she asked a question that froze me in place. She wanted to know if I had seen her. I never told anyone about the encounter, yet somehow she already knew. Slowly, I admitted the truth. She lowered her eyes and remained silent for several moments. Then she revealed a secret she had carried for most of her life. When she was a child in Mexico, her older brother disappeared near a river. According to family members, he had followed the sound of a crying woman one night and never returned. Search parties found no trace of him. No explanation ever emerged. Her family became convinced that La Llorona had taken him. Whether the story was true or not, the pain still haunted her decades later. Before I left the room, she gave one final warning. Once La Llorona notices you, she may continue searching for you. A week later, I woke shortly after 3 a.m. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I heard wet footsteps moving slowly through the hallway outside my bedroom. Each step was followed by the sound of dripping water. The footsteps eventually stopped directly outside my door. My heart pounded in my chest. Then the doorknob began turning. Slowly, deliberately. I sat frozen in bed, unable to move. A woman's voice whispered from the hallway. The words were soft but unmistakable. Mis hijos, my children. Moments later, gentle crying filled the house. The sadness in that sound felt overwhelming. It carried a grief so deep that it seemed impossible to describe. For several terrifying minutes, she remained outside my room, crying, whispering, searching. Finally, the footsteps began moving away. The sounds faded into the distance until silence returned. I spent the rest of the night awake, staring at the door and waiting for sunrise. Several months passed before I heard the crying again. This time, it came from directly outside my bedroom window. When I looked through the glass, I saw the woman standing at the edge of the street staring toward the house. For a brief moment, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, pity. She seemed trapped in endless suffering, forever searching for children she could never find. Then she slowly raised her head. For the first time, I saw her face clearly. Her eyes were completely black, and water poured endlessly from them. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, far beyond what should have been possible. The expression on her face combined grief and rage into something truly horrifying. Suddenly, she opened her mouth and screamed. The sound exploded through the neighborhood. Every window facing the street shattered instantly. I fell backward onto the floor. When I looked again, she was gone. That was the last time I ever saw La Llorona. That encounter happened more than 15 years ago, but some memories never fade. I've moved away from that town. I have a family of my own now, a different life, and responsibilities that keep me busy. Yet there are nights when I wake up suddenly around 3 a.m. and listen to the silence around me. Sometimes, when everything is perfectly still, I think I hear distant crying carried by the wind. Maybe it's only memory. Maybe it's imagination. Or maybe some legends survive because they are rooted in truths we don't fully understand. Across Mexico and throughout many communities in the United States, stories of La Llorona continue to be told generation after generation. Parents still warn their children to stay away from rivers, canals, lakes, and streams after dark. Whether the legend is supernatural or simply a cautionary tale, one message remains the same. Water can be dangerous, and curiosity can lead people into places they should never go. If you ever find yourself alone at night and hear the sound of a woman crying near the water, remember the warning that was given to me long ago. Do not investigate, do not answer, and whatever you do, do not follow the sound. Because according to the oldest versions of the legend, if the crying sounds close, she is far away. But if the crying sounds distant, she may already be standing right behind you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more terrifying legends and true horror tales from around the world. Until next time, stay safe and sweet dreams.